Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 3, Episode 15. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. There's plenty of content out there, whether it be a movie, whether it be an actual post on social media, whether it be in television or print, about how social media has such a negative influence on our life. Well, dear listener, is it possible that social media is simply a mirror as to who we really are and who we are really becoming? And although my ego thinks otherwise, most everything that we do, most everything that we interpret in the world, the way that we see things, our belief system, well, it's just unconscious programming. Like a computer, like a smartphone even, we're just running programs that we don't even realize. Wrapping up, did you do your homework assignment, dear listener? Did you go and look to see what kind of fees you were being charged in your 401k and your IRA? Probably not. If you like what you hear, please thumbs up, please write a review, 5-star, subscribe, send to friends far and wide. This is Why I Don't Vote podcast. It is on Patreon. If you like what you hear, please support. You'll be happy, all you dog walkers. This episode is less than 30 minutes.
Act 1. We must stop playing victim. Social media is just a neutral mirror reflecting who we are.
It's been a tough go changing careers, and changing careers where I went from the law, where a number of people actually come to you with a problem. It's not really that much that you need to sell them on whether or not they need a solution. It's whether or not you are the one who can achieve that solution. They're buyers. They're going to buy the service. They don't have a choice. It's who is going to be the service provider. That's a hell of a lot different paradigm than the one where you're selling a product that someone could say, I don't need it. I just don't have to buy this right now. It's a hell of a lot different paradigm when you're selling a service that someone could say, I don't need it. I just don't need to pay the money for this right now. Years ago, I had heard some of the recordings by Earl Nightingale, and in an effort to help boost my attitude in the beginning of my day, I will go on to the YouTube when I get up in the morning, and rather listening to the news or music or whatever else suits my fancy, I will start listening to some of those old Earl Nightingale recordings that were done in the 1950s and the early 1960s. I thought about doing an entire segment on this point. I don't know that it really warrants it. Most of the material that you have from the self-help and self-improvement gurus of the 2000s, over the course of the last 20 or 30 years, most of this material is simply repurposed from material that was created in the 1920s, the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s. And most of that older material now is free because many of those recordings are out there on the YouTubes. They're out there in the Googleverse. While you see a lot of different people promoting some sort of mastermind or spiritual coach or business coach or whatever niche they're trying to reach, that's all repurposed material from the 1950s and the 1960s. And a lot of the material from the 50s and the 60s was repurposed from the 20s and the 30s. The point being, you don't need to go out and spend thousands of dollars, if not tens of thousands of dollars, in order to get the substance of the material that any self-improvement, any self-help coach, any business coach or life coach is going to give you. They're they're akin to a personal trainer. You can go out on YouTube and get the exercises. You can go out on YouTube and learn about all the diets. What a personal trainer is really doing for you is motivating your lazy ass. And that's not a problem for me. And I'm certainly not trying to be braggadocious. Motivation, that's not the issue. I drag my ass out of bed morning after morning, day after day, week after week, year after year, to march into an office to practice law, and I probably could count on both hands and maybe have to use one of my feet on the number of days that I felt really inspired to do it. But you can go in to a law office and you can chew nails with the rest of them, because that's basically what a bunch of lawyers do in those offices. It's somewhat of a sophisticated white-collar prison, just a bunch of people chewing nails ready to rip each other's throats out. In sales, your attitude has to be completely different. So I've taken to listening to these motivational recordings, in particular from Earl Nightingale, in the morning to get me ready to go out and to pitch my wares. What I've noticed over the course of the last few months is how the algorithm, particularly on YouTube, which is my medium of choice, but even on Spotify, even on iTunes, these mediums are now promoting to me a different kind of quote-unquote entertainment. These things are not promoting to me the things that they had been promoting in the past. And it came over me that we blame social media for a lot of the problems that we face in the way that we think, the way that we see things, our outlook on the world. We blame social media. The level of suicides, whether you're white, black, Asian, Hispanic, you're young, you're old, you're male, you're female, you're born in the West, you're born in the East, all across the planet. All of these things, they're universal to us. Suicides, skyrocketing. Depression, skyrocketing. And you could say it's probably worse in the West than it is in other areas of the world because we have more access to the internets, to the social medias. But it's not limited to the West. It's not limited to any one country. I've discussed it here on this podcast before that social media is just basically comparison, and comparison is the thief of joy. Yet social media has another window that I had never looked through, that I had never even opened. Maybe door is the better word for it. And that is, there is a ton of material on the internets, on these social media platforms that is uplifting, that is inspirational, that is motivational. These algorithms for these social media platforms, they're geared towards getting you to click again. That's their only goal. I want another click. I want to keep you on the platform and I want you to click again. I want you to scroll more. So if you come to the platform with the intent of comparison, you're going to get comparison. If you come to the platform with the intent of criticism, you're going to get criticism. If you come to the platform for vulgarity, you'll get vulgarity. If you come to the platform for shallowness, for vacuousness, for looks over all else, you will you get shallowness. Oh, will you get vacuousness. I would not go as far to say this is an epiphany, but it was certainly a stark realization. Social media is just a mirror. It is just a reflection of where we are at. When you open up Facebook or YouTube or Twitter or Instagram, it's really just a reflection of where you are at. If you see a number of positive, uplifting things on these social media platforms, that's what you've been seeking. That's what you've been listening to. That's what you've been paying attention to. It is out there. I have been privy to, I have been exposed to now a number of different types of recordings by brilliant people who are speaking on how you actually create your own reality through the thoughts that you think. More often than not, Earl Nightingale, The Greatest Secret, you are what you think most of the time. This was not proposed simply by Earl Nightingale. This has been proposed by a number of different inspirational and pseudoscience type figures, religious figures who dabble in metaphysics. There's a guy named Ernest Holmes who wrote a book called The Science of the Mind. This was back in, I believe, the 20s or the early 30s. And a lot of material from these inspirational speakers in the 50s and the 60s, you can see the origins in those writings, those metaphysical, spiritual writings that had a lot of foundation in the Bible. There's a man named Neville Goddard. I've mentioned him on the podcast before. He has a number of recordings that are out there, and there are people who have read his works on YouTube. I was exposed to this material simply by starting to go down that rabbit hole, and the algorithm went out and found more of it for me. More inspiration, more motivation. And in looking at my social media, recognizing that it had changed, it looked different. And I'm not somebody who puts a lot of time and energy in social media in the first place. It came through me. This is a reflection of you. You've changed. So let's not blame social media for all of the ills of the world. Perhaps it is an opportunity to allow some of the ills that roam around inside of us a voice, a forum, a feeding ground. I'll say it over and over again on this podcast, dear listeners. I do not believe as people that we have changed substantially over the course of the last 30 or 40 years, namely the last 20 years, but even the last 30 or 40 years because of the advent of technology, of computers, of smartphones, of social media. If you look in the mirror and you don't like what you see, you know that you have to change. A mirror is completely emotionless. A mirror is completely neutral. If social media is a mirror, go and look in that mirror. Go and look in that 21st century technological mirror and tell me if you like what you see.
Act 2, believe it or not. Most everything we interpret in our outer world is unconscious programming.
It isn't a new concept for me to hear that we're running unconscious programming as part of our interpretation of the world. You hear this in spiritual contexts, namely if you're Christian from the Bible. It's never framed that way, particularly by some of the more simplistic of the preachers and the pastors. But even Billy Graham would talk about how things that we see in the world are influenced by our own thinking. Now, our assumption, at least my assumption, I don't want to make overarching statements about how other people see things. I believe it's consistent among most of us that when we talk about, when we are discussing, when we are listening to people discuss, the whole thing about, we are what we think and our thoughts create our reality. What we really, truly believe is that when we are having a negative thought, when we are expressing a negative motion, we're not in control, and that is us creating our reality, and we can change those thoughts, and we can work hard to control our emotions, our reactions, if you will. When you avail yourself to some of the Eastern philosophies, when you avail yourself to some of the metaphysical philosophies, when you start to avail yourself to just plain psychology, psychoanalytics, you hear more and more, we are running unconscious programs. The way we see the world isn't as deliberate or intentional as we believe it to be. It's unconscious programming that we're not even aware of. Egoistic Patrick thought this was stupid bullshit. Reflecting back on myself 5 years ago, I still wrote down my goals. I often would repeat out loud different types of affirmations, different types of dreams, goals, what have you. Yet the idea that there was unconscious programming that you were completely unaware of, that in a reaction to something, you were literally just running a program. Like a computer, you had very little independence in the way you reacted to things. And this programming is basically beginning in month 6 of your life to probably age 4, at least according to many of the people who have studied adolescent behavior, psychological development in children and adolescents. Point being, this programming starts very early. This programming is basically being downloaded from your parents and the environment that they've created for you, and it's completely unconscious, and you're running it without you knowing it. Me no likey. The ego does not want to believe that there's a bunch of unconscious programming that's controlling the way that you see things and that you have very little control over that unconscious programming. Why am I rambling on at length about this? Well, I've got a point. And here it is. I want you, dear listener, to do a little experiment if you don't believe that most of the programming that we have, most of the way that we see the world, is not because we've read things and we've experienced things and we've weighed all of the facts and we've balanced all of the different opinions, all of the varying and opposite forces that are at work. Nope. Most of the way we see things is completely unconscious. It comes up through us without us even knowing it, and we're literally just reacting. All we're doing is in a mode of reaction. Here is the experiment. Whether your activity be exciting or mundane, focus on it exclusively. And I mean exclusively. And when I say focus, focus on nothing else but what you're doing. If you were walking to your car to get into your car, focus exclusively on that journey, every step of that journey, how you feel in that journey. And I don't mean to take 6 or 8 steps and think you've accomplished something. This experiment should be conducted doing something that takes 60 seconds or longer. My challenge to you, dear listener, is focus on whatever that singular activity is to the exclusion of everything else in the world for 60 seconds or longer. 60 seconds. 60. Doesn't seem like that much, does it? In 60 seconds, dear listener, I practically guarantee you, you will get distracted. A thought will pop into your head. A song will pop into your head. You'll have some strange recollection of doing something similar to what you're doing that you've done in the past, that maybe you believe you're going to have to do in the future. You will have some kind of tangential memory pop into your head. You'll have some absolutely unrelated bullshit come into your head, whether it actually happened, whether it's something that you fantasize you want to happen, whether, and this is the big one, it's something that you dread happening. Within 60 short seconds, this will happen to you. And this is the whole point of this podcast segment. It's okay. You're not unique. This doesn't make you bad. You didn't fail. It's an illustration. It is a blessing in a way. Your mind and body are showing you, look, you run unconscious programming. I know you want to focus on something, and I know you want to focus on something to the exclusion of everything else. And it's just not going to happen. Get there in your head, dear listener. Where do those thoughts come from? Why do they come up in the way that they do when they do? Are you actually thinking of those things, or are they just appearing and you're noticing them? If they are just appearing and you are noticing them, aren't you running something unconsciously? Isn't something unconsciously happening that you just take notice of versus you conjuring it up and then having some level of control, or you losing control over that thought, that emotion? You have to work it. You have to train yourself on being completely and totally focused on one thing to the exclusion of all other stimuli in your environment. It's difficult being completely present. Have you heard, dear listener, of this peculiar and brilliant approach of our brain to the outside world, that it actually filters out most of the stuff that's happening? There's so much going on, and our brain can take in so much information that it realizes, in conjunction with our body, we would be overstimulated at all times if every single thing that was going on was being translated and reacted to by our brain and body. So our brain and our body work together to filter out all the things that we think. And when I say we, that's the conscious, that's the subconscious, hell, that's probably the superconscious, working in conjunction to filter out what we believe we don't need. This isn't important. This is only moderately important. This is very important. That is an unconscious program. The things that we believe in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, these things that are so important, where did we learn to filter them? We learned when we were 6 months old, when we were 18 months old, when we were 22 months old. We're still running that stuff unconsciously. And the best way to demonstrate it to yourself, to see this illustration, go wash the dishes. Go wash the dishes for 60, 90, 120 seconds. Pledge to yourself, all I'm going to do is focus, to the exclusion of everything else, on washing these dishes. I'm going to feel the dish in my hand. I'm going to feel the temperature of the water. I'm going to feel the sponge in my hand. I'm going to hear the water hitting the dish. I'm going to feel the revolutions that my hand makes when it washes the dish with the sponge, and I'm going to feel the suds of the soap against my skin. To the extent that I can actually feel it, I'm going to try to interpret my arm moving with an intent that my brain is sending the signals to have my arm move, and I'm going to focus on that. 14 seconds later, you're going to be thinking about some dumbass car chase scene that was tacked on to the latest superhero movie, and you're going to completely forget that you had any intention whatsoever to focus on those dishes. No matter how much your ego tries to fight it, it's the truth. And this is the truth. This isn't some kind of variable truth that we can all say, well, I see things one way and you see things another, and that's the truth for both of us. No, the universal truth is we're both running unconscious programming, that we're running different programs. That might be our individual reality, but are we running programs in the first place? Yes. Are those programs unconscious? Yes. By simply recognizing as much, are we capable of making a massive change in our life? Yes. Don't believe me? Give it a try.
Act 3. Be honest. You never checked to see what fees you were paying in your 401k or IRA, did you?
Episode 5 of Season 3 of this podcast went over what kind of fees you were possibly paying inside of your 401k, inside of your IRA, your management fees, and how much that actually meant to you in overall account value, but most importantly, in overall retirement income over the life of that account. A 2% management fee can equate to half of the total account growth being paid to fees over the life of a 401k or an IRA. And remember, the life of those accounts is not the time that you are contributing to the account. In those accounts, as we discussed, as I'm sure you all know by now, you're actually still paying a management fee in those types of accounts, in a 401k, in an IRA, in a number of other types of accounts, in an index fund, in different types of brokerage accounts. That can equate to half of the total account value being paid in fees because you're still paying those fees after you retire, when you start to take income. Be honest, dear listener. Did you go and look to see what kind of fees were being charged you? Were being charged to your account, in your 401k, in your IRA, in your brokerage account, in your index fund? Doesn't matter where you live. Region doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how old you are. Age doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what race you are. Ethnicity doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what church you go to, because religion doesn't matter. We love the idea of a pension in this country. We've been told that pensions are bad, but fundamentally, we love the idea of a pension. The reason being, we don't have to pay attention. We can faithfully put money away into some sort of account, and then that money will be returned to us in income when we retire, and we'll have more money than we would have had we gone out and tried to learn how to invest, we really want to believe that this system works because it is so easy. We don't want to have to think that hard about how to grow and how to accumulate our money. We certainly don't want to think that hard about how our money will be working for us once we retire. We really want to believe in the privatized pension. And it's going to be a rude awakening, as it has been for the baby boomers, for many people in their 30s and 40s and 50s today, that the privatized pension isn't that great an investment vehicle, and it is a god-awful retirement vehicle. It does not produce much in the way of retirement income, and one of the reasons why it doesn't is because a lot of the money that's actually generated in this experiment, I mean, it's not hundreds of years old. It was really started, as I alluded to in episode 5, it was really started in the late 70s and early 80s. It's still an experiment. This experiment does not produce sufficient retirement income, particularly for the level of investment, the level of commitment that people make to it. What does it do reliably? Well, it pays the advisor, it pays the fund manager, it pays those healthy management fees, a percentage of the account every month for the rest of your life. You didn't go and look, dear listener, for the same reason that I never did until I did, because I was afraid of what I would find. And then what? Once I actually discovered that I was paying a 2.1% management fee, I mean, what the hell am I going to do then? The shock, the realization that most of the money that I've been investing is getting eaten up by management fees, and in the end, I will have recouped out of that 60 years worth of investment, 30 years investing and then 30 years withdrawing as income, I will have taken out the same amount as I paid to someone to quote unquote manage the account. No one's ever lied to us. We're not victims. It isn't in the moment that you realize that it all went wrong, that it all went wrong. It all went wrong well before you had that actualization, that realization. And yet, if you examine what happened, you had signs all along the way, something's not right. I need to make a change. You may be in your car listening to this. You may be walking your dog. You may be eating lunch. That bright red light is not the siren to tell you that there's a fire in the building. It isn't the police coming to arrest you. It is that self, that you, that manages your money. The bros on Wall Street have that cocaine and they have that champagne. It's models and bottles. And you have been led to believe it's because they know something you don't. They understand how the markets work. They understand how finance works. I'm sorry, dear listener. I'm so sorry. I hate to break it to you. You pay for the cocaine and the champagne. You pay for the models and bottles. It's the fees that are being extracted from your 401k and your IRA that are the foundation of the flow of money that goes through Wall Street. The second you wake up to that realization, that river of money dries up, and you can keep it for yourself. You can turn that flow of money back towards you. Feel into it and tell me that I'm wrong. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.